Oh, yeah.
Good, how you doing? Hello. Good evening to everybody. Welcome to this beautiful, beautiful new refurbished building here, the chambers. And I'll start off with opening this meeting for the Santa Fe County Planning Commission on Thursday, July 15th, 2021. Can I have a roll call, please?
Charlie Gonzalez.
Here.
Frank Katz. J.J. Gonzalez. Steve Krentz. Leroy Lopez.
Here.
Susan Martin. Reyes Serna. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, approval of agenda. Vicky, do we have any amendments or table or withdrawn items?
Mr. Chair, we don't have any changes to the agenda.
Thank you. Okay, approval of the minutes of June 17th, 2021. Okay, no discussion? Oh, there's Steve. Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay. Okay, we don't have anything on the consent agenda, right, Vicky?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. New business. Case number 21-5020, Manuel Roybal, Rural Commercial Overlay. Jose, please proceed.
Oh, sorry. Manuel Roybal, applicant, Siebert and Associates Incorporated, agent, requests approval to create a rural commercial overlay district on 3 parcels of land that are either contiguous or connected by relatively small easement. The establishment of overlay zones is governed by Section 8.11 of Chapter 8 of the Sustainable Land Development Code, and the establishment of a rural commercial overlay district is governed by SLDC Section 8.11.2. The current zoning on the parcels is residential community for all of 1.7723B US Highway 84-285, virtually all of 17747 US Highway 84-285, and approximately half of 17725 US 84-285, and rural fringe for a small sliver in the northwest corner of 17747 US Highway 84-285, and the western portion of 17725 US Highway 84-285. The applicant is requesting approval to create a rural commercial overlay district on 3 parcels of land in conformance with SLDC Section 8.11.2. The current zoning on the 3 parcels is a combination of residential community and rural fringe. There are adjacent tracts of land that are currently zoned as commercial general. The creation of a ORC will not alter the existing zoning of Res C or rural fringe on the 3 lots. The proposed rural commercial overlay district would allow the non-residential uses identified in SLDC Section 8.11.23 as permitted uses and Section 8.11.24 as conditional uses. The uses permitted within the underlying zoning would also be allowed. SLDC Section 8.11.22 identifies Res C and rural fringe as appropriate zoning to create a rural commercial overlay district. This application was reviewed for the following applicable design standards as per Chapter 7 Sustainable Design Standards of the SLDC: access, fire protection, road design standards, water supply, wastewater and water conservation, protection of historic and archaeological resources, terrain management, and flood prevention and flood control. Building and Development Services staff has reviewed this project for compliance with pertinent SLDC requirements and has found that the facts presented support the request to create a rural commercial overlay district. The 3 parcels are either contiguous or in close proximity. The current zoning on the 3 parcels is residential community and rural fringe. There are adjacent tracts of land that are currently zoned as commercial general. The creation of a rural commercial overlay district will not alter the existing zoning of Res C and rural fringe on the 3 lots. If the overlay zone is approved by the Board of County Commissioners, it will be included on the zoning map when that is next updated. These adjustments to the existing zoning map will reflect the 3 lots as rural commercial overlay zone and the underlying zoning as Res C and rural fringe. Staff has established findings that this application to create a rural commercial overlay district within a residential community zoning is in compliance with the criteria set forth in the SLDC. On May 13, 2021, this request was presented to the Sustainable Land Development Hearing Officer. The hearing officer memorialized findings of fact and the conclusions of law in a written order on the request. The hearing officer, based on the evidence presented, recommended approval of the request for the creation of a rural commercial overlay district on 3 parcels of land with the underlying zoning designated as residential community and rural fringe, with the conditions recommended by staff. The recommendation of the hearing officer and staff's recommendation is for approval of the request for the creation of a rural commercial overlay district on the 3 parcels of land with the underlying zoning designated as residential community or rural fringe with the following conditions. Mr. Chair, may I enter these conditions into the record?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This report and the exhibits listed below are hereby submitted as part of the hearing record. The Board of County Commissioners may hold a public hearing on this matter on September 14, 2021. And Mr. Chair, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Jose. Does the Commissioner have any questions of staff? Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question perhaps for the lawyer. I just want to confirm that there's no problem that the properties aren't contiguous. I understand there's an easement, and does that solve the problem?
Your understanding is correct, Mr. Commissioner, and I don't think there should be any problem simply because the parcels aren't directly contiguous because of the existence of that easement. I'm certainly not aware of any legal issues that raises, so we are comfortable with that.
But thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Katz. Any other questions from the commission to staff? Okay. Is the applicant here? Jim, is that going to be you?
Hello, this is Emmanuel Roybal. I'm the applicant.
Hello. Okay. My name's Jim Siebert. My business address is 915 Mercer. I'm representing Manuel Roybal, who is here virtually tonight as well. What I'm going to do, I noticed that in the packet there wasn't a really clear description of where we're requesting the commercial overlay zone. So what I'm going to do is hand out these to the commission, to the recorder and the commission. You want to do it? Okay. But it provides a little clearer description of where exactly this overlay is taking place. The one thing I'd like to point out is that on the very bottom of what you'll be looking at is where Manuel Roybal and Roybal Enterprises has their current office and yard, and it is zoned commercial. And at the far north end, at the top of the paper, is where the Poake Pueblo used to have their flea market, and they've cleared it out, but it appears that there's going to be some future use there in the near future, which we assume to be commercial. But this land is really kind of sandwiched between the commercial and to the south, which is all commercial for a considerable distance, and to the north really with what we anticipate with the Poake Pueblo. So it seemed logical to zone this residential 1 unit per acre when it really is more commercial in nature. We agreed to the conditions as stated, and I'm available to answer any questions. And Mr. Roybal, who's on the meeting, is available as well.
Thank you, Jim. Does any of the commissioners have any questions of the applicant? JJ.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Siebert, I read in the packet that there's a well on the property, 3 acre-feet of well, a pre-moratorium well, and that there's like 10 acres of water rights available for this project, and the consumptive use would be like 6 acres that they can transfer. An application has been made to the state engineer's office, and with AMOT water system being, built in that area, what is the plan for all that water that they might transfer to the property?
Well, it's an interesting comment because one of the conditions is that when the AMOT the regional water system is available, he's required to hook onto it. Mr. Roybal doesn't have any issues with that. But we did check with the state engineer's office, or the attorney did, to verify that those water rights that would be transferred would be retained on the property and could be transferred to another location. He does not lose those water rights.
What was that again?
That the water rights that he will be transferring onto the property, when he does hook on to the regional water system, which we don't know, could be 5 years or 15 years future, that those water rights don't just simply disappear. He still has the ownership of those water rights and can transfer them to another location if he wishes. He can't use them on site because he will be hooked to the regional water system.
So when the regional water system comes to that property, those water rights, if they're transferred to that property, they'll have to be transferred to another location. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, yeah.
That's an awful lot of work, I think, to transfer water rights. There's a lot of protests. I mean, where can you transfer it to without getting a lot of protests? You know, it's very difficult.
Well, it does make the property that much more developable if he's got water rights on the land, and he already has the water rights. They are on the land. He's just simply transferring them from irrigation rights to domestic rights.
Well, thank you very much. You know, those are all the questions I have at this time, Mr. Chair.
Okay, do any other commissioners have any questions of the applicant? Steve?
Okay, that's better. Thank you. That's it as part of one of the recommendations. I don't see that here anywhere in documents provided to us, both in the memorandum nor in the following document, the recommended order. Am I missing this somewhere?
Mr. Chair, Commission Member Krenz, can you repeat your question, please?
It was stated that this discussion we just had about water rights and using the water system when it becomes available, that is part of the conditions of recommendation, but I don't see that condition listed in either the recommended order nor in the memorandum. Am I missing this somewhere else, some other document?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, condition number 4.
Condition number. What document?
In the report, in the staff report.
Mr. Chair, Commission Member Krenz, it's page NBA-9.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. That's all I have, sir.
Any other questions from the commission to the applicant? Okay. Hold on, Jim. I have a question. I'm not sure if this will be more to staff or to the applicant. So on the parcel that's in the FEMA floodplain zone, if the applicant decided, I think it might be more for staff, if the applicant decided that he wanted to apply for a permit for extraction of construction materials, I know there's a setback requirement for the FEMA. Would he be allowed to go through that process?
Mr. Chair, if you were to submit to do that, it would be considered a development of countywide impact, so that he would have to come to make an application of that sort, and it would be reviewed by reviewing agencies, the hearing officer, planning commission, and the board.
That's what I was hoping for. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, also the uses that are allowed within this commercial overlay, that's what they get. So the use of mining or extraction is not on the use list.
Thank you. Okay, this is a public hearing. Is there anybody out there that wants to speak in favor or against this project? Please come forward. Okay, nobody out there? Okay, being that said, no one's here to speak. What's the pleasure or discussion by the commission.
Mr. Chair, if I could just clarify, there are people on attendance via WebEx. So I don't know if our IT department can hear, but if they can make sure that there's people are unmuted if they wish to speak.
Okay. Is there anybody out there online that wants to speak? Through WebEx, I guess I should say? How would I know if they want to speak?
Mr. Chair, we can see the screen, and it looks like there are, most people are muted, so if we can just take a second to see if our IT department can unmute them.
Unmuting is available for anybody from the public who would like to click the unmute button on their WebEx application.
Okay, Mr. Chair, it doesn't look like anyone is coming forward.
No. The only one that's on is looks like Manuel Reball, maybe.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, well, I guess I would like to speak. To make a long story short, I know you have a long night ahead of you.
Excuse me, could I swear you in? Wherever
Yes,
are?
you can.
Okay.
I'm Manuel Roybal.
Okay. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the whole truth?
Yes, I do.
And please state your name for the record.
Manuel Roybal.
Thank you.
Okay, to start with, the property in question was acquired approximately 50 years ago. In 1972, we set up Roybal Enterprises, which is commercial now, and the business is still in the same place. In 1979, we went to the Board of County Commissioners and requested that the area that in question now be zoned as commercial. We went through the county commissioners and we got approval. I think staff has all the documents showing the process we went through. It was approved in 79 as commercial. Now, when they did the new zonings and stuff, somehow or other, we were left out. In other words, we're changed back to residential. I don't think we should have ever been because, for one, as it's been said, the area in question is optimum for commercial because for safety purposes, because we lie in between two overpasses with good XL and decel lanes. For public safety, it's probably the safest zoning area for commercial in Pewaukee, with the frontage roads that are in place. The Buffalo Thunder and all the other businesses in the area are using this frontage road. And if you look at traffic reports, it's one of the areas that have better traffic safety than anywhere else. So another thing is, we've been using the land in question or major portion of it as vacant commercial because we have the yard, which is zoned as commercial, but when we got zoned for commercial in 79, we extended our yard for, we sell plastic pipe and irrigation supplies on for the parcels of land in question. So it has been used, and that's the reason we had it zoned as commercial since 79. And to keep it legal, that's why we did it, and that's one of the reasons we're requesting it is at this point is it is in commercial usage, and we'd like to keep it that way.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ibal. Is that it?
Yeah, that should about cover it.
Okay. Thank you for your input. Okay.
Thank you.
One more time. Anybody out there from the public who wants to speak on this? Okay. What's the pleasure of the commission?
Mr. Chair,
Discussion? Rhea?
I move that we approve the creation of a rural commercial overlay district for the applicant.
We have a second by Susan. Okay.
Mr. Chair, Can I
Yes.
just get clarification? Does the motion include approval with staff conditions?
With the conditions?
And I want to amend my motion for the approval of the creation of the overlay zone with the staff recommendations and conditions.
Second the amendment with conditions.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and thank you for the work.
Good luck. Okay.
Thank you.
Next new business, ordinance number 2021, an ordinance amending the Santa Fe County Sustainable Land Development Code ordinance. Okay, Penny herself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Planning Commission members. So in April of this year, the legislature enacted and the governor signed the Cannabis Regulation Act into law. The new Cannabis Control Division is in the process of drafting regulations in accordance with that act. The state has actually issued draft regulations, but still has public discussion until early August. However, it will start issuing licenses for production September 1st. Therefore, staff is initiating an amendment of the SLDC to establish comprehensive countywide zoning and other regulations related to cannabis. In doing so, we are aware that we were not riding on a clean slate. The SLDC has existing regulations concerning medical cannabis as follows, and we are building from those. Section 1022 of the SLDC already identifies how certain medical cannabis activities should be regulated, and this proposed ordinance just builds off of those. So first I'm going to do an overview of some of the issues related to the ordinance. There are several issues related to cannabis establishments, including odor, safety, security, water use, and neighborhood nuisance. So this portion relates to the commercial cannabis establishments, specifically the growing of cannabis. The production of cannabis can create a strong odor and can create compatibility issues with surrounding uses. Therefore, staff recommends that indoor producers be required to use industry-standard techniques to minimize odor. In addition, outdoor growing is recommended only in zoning districts with larger lot sizes. Manufacturing of cannabis. The production and methods of manufacturing of cannabis and the use of propane under pressure can be volatile and can cause fire and explosion risks. Cannabis consumption areas. It is proposed that this use be separated into recreational and medical use. Medical-only cannabis consumption areas would be allowed within a cannabis retailer. Recreational cannabis consumption areas would be allowed in the same districts as a bar, since both of these uses are similar and they're where people go under the influence of a drug and are limited to people over the age of 21. Also, due to the odor and secondhand exposure risk, it's proposed that these consumption areas be allowed for smoking be indoor in a standalone building where smoke doesn't infiltrate into other workplaces. Separation. The Act allows jurisdictions to require a separation between cannabis businesses and schools or daycares, up to a total of 300 foot, and also between cannabis businesses. For safety and protection of children, a 300-foot separation between cannabis businesses and schools and daycares is recommended. Density of licenses. A 200-foot separation is recommended between any cannabis retailer or cannabis consumption area. The county has a number of vibrant but small retail or non-residential areas, and the 200-foot separation requirement will prevent an area from becoming solely a cannabis retail consumption, thereby fundamentally changing the nature of the non-residential area, possibly crowding out other businesses. There is an issue that has been added on a supplemental memo that I'll go over as we speak specifically to the ordinance sections. Personal use. For reasons of safety, water use, and odor, the proposed ordinance states that personal growing be indoors. Again, there's an issue on the supplemental memo, and I will go over that as I speak to the ordinance. So the details of the proposed ordinance. The first section amends 10.6 home occupations of the SLDC. Because of safety compatibility issues and neighborhood nuisance and other considerations, the proposed ordinance will prohibit home occupation permits being issued for cannabis establishments. Section 1022(2). This ordinance includes findings related to the Act, the existing code, odor, water use, security, and density of licenses. Zoning districts. The proposed ordinance recommends that the board determine that cannabis establishments and consumption areas should be allowed in those zoning districts where similar uses are allowed. This is the new section 10.22.3. 1022.3.1 relates to cannabis testing laboratories and cannabis research laboratories, and they should be treated the same as research and development services. And this is the same as the existing code for medical cannabis. 1022.3.2, cannabis manufacturers would be treated as food, textiles, and related products. Again, this is the same as the existing SLDC for medical cannabis. 1022.3.3, a cannabis producer or producer microbusiness that grows indoors shall be treated as a commercial greenhouse. Again, same as existing code for medical cannabis. A cannabis producer or cannabis producer microbusiness that cultivates cannabis plants outdoors would be treated as a dairy farm, as both produce strong odor and are outdoor uses that cannot effectively control odor and are usually located in our larger zoning districts. 1022.3.5 is a cannabis retailer should be treated the same as a store or a shop. Again, that is the same as existing SLDC for medical cannabis. Section 1022.3.6, cannabis consumption area. Recreational consumption areas are proposed to be treated as bars, taverns, and nightclubs. Both are locations where people go to be under the influence of a drug, and this section requires that consumption areas that include smoking and vaping be indoor in a standalone building where smoke does not infiltrate into workplaces. Medical cannabis consumption areas are proposed to be allowed inside any cannabis retailer. Again, same as existing SLDC. And again, if smoking is proposed in this consumption area, the proposal requires that consumption areas that include smoking and vaping be indoor in a standalone building where smoke does not infiltrate to other workplaces. 1022.3.7 is cannabis couriers would be treated as a courier and messenger service facility. And the Act also allows vertically integrated cannabis establishments, for example, those that produce, manufacture, and sell. The proposal is that those be located in the zoning district in which each of the uses are authorized. Separation between schools and daycares in the cannabis businesses. Section 1022.4 of the draft ordinance proposes a minimum separation between businesses and an existing school or daycare of 300 foot. Separation between retail and consumption areas. This is section 1022.5. A 200-foot separation is proposed between any retailer or consumption area. In the supplemental memo, the BCC had their meeting to publish title and general summary on Tuesday, and a commissioner brought up a concern that this number may be too low and that a 300-foot separation may be more appropriate. So staff has prepared some sample maps. They've been handed out. They're on the 11 by 17 pages. They show some non-residential and traditional areas within the county, indicating possible locations of retail or consumption areas to indicate how possible separations could be seen. You'll see 3 rings around each of them. That's at 100, 200, and 300-foot separation. And note, these are not actual cannabis retailers. They're just shown for reference purposes. They're only picked as being existing non-residential uses. Section 1022.6 is regarding hours. It's proposed that the hours cannabis consumption areas and cannabis retailers would be the same hours of alcohol sales. The actual hours listed in the ordinance, since drafting that, the hours for Sunday sales have changed. So staff would actually recommend that the hours of operation be changed in the ordinance as we take it to the board to reflect that new law. 1022.7 requires that growers and manufacturers meet industry standards to minimize odors. And 1022.8 regulates personal production, requires personal growing to be located inside a structure. Again, on the supplemental memo, if I can open it. At the BCC meeting, several commissioners were concerned that this could be too restrictive, so staff has since reviewed the existing nuisance ordinance, which has also been handed out. That's Ordinance 2009-11, and found that it covers odors. Therefore, the odor concern has been handled elsewhere. So staff puts forward two alternatives as follows. The first one would be to remove section 10.22.8 from the proposed ordinance. The pros of that could be that the county noise control and public nuisance ordinance would still prohibit the obnoxious odors. It would allow more personal growth opportunities. It would allow outdoor grow, maybe use less energy than indoor grow. And individuals growing personal plants would not need to invest in screening or indoor growing equipment. The cons could be unregulated outdoor grow could create security or diversion concerns. Visible outdoor grow can create an attractive nuisance for underage, an attractive target for the illegal market. And lack of prescriptive standards such as setbacks may increase neighbor-to-neighbor disputes or cause for code enforcement to enforce the nuisance ordinance. The second alternative would be to amend section 1022.8 to state that personal growing can be indoor or outdoor if it is not visible from a public way. The pros of that would be having the plants not visible from public ways, security or diversion concerns are reduced. Allows more personal growth opportunities, would allow a variety of locations for outdoor grow on most properties. This is more performance-based rather than prescriptive, like an actual setback, as visibility will differ between areas and properties. And the noise and nuisance ordinance would still prohibit the odors. And again, outdoor grow may use less energy than indoor grow. Cons, security diversion risks greater with outdoor grow, but less than with unregulated outdoor grow. And lack of prescriptive standards may increase, again, neighbor disputes. The next portion of the ordinance, I believe from page 5 on, are the definitions. It includes relevant definitions of the Cannabis Regulation Act that will amend Appendix A of the SLDC. I've also handed out 4 public comments that have been received so far. And the effective date, if this ordinance is approved by the board, it will take 30 days to come into effect. Therefore, staff request that the Planning Commission act upon this ordinance so the second public hearing can take place at a special BCC meeting on July 30th. The recommendation, staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this ordinance, and if you can also have a recommendation on the alternatives for personal grow and the alternatives for retail consumption area separation and the change in the hours. And I stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Penny. I guess the first question for me is that so we as part of our recommendation we need to pick which alternative, 1 or 2, correct?
Mr. Chair, either existing as written, 1 or 2, or make other recommendations.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Penny.
you.
Okay. Does the commission have any questions of Penny or staff? No? Not yet, I guess. This is a public hearing. Is there anybody out there from the public that wants to speak in favor or against this proposed ordinance? Please come forward and state your name and address to the reporter.
My name is Subi Bowden. Yes, it is the whole truth. Thank you. Chairman Gonzalez, Vice Chairman Katz, and Planning Commission members. I'm an architect and planner here in Santa Fe and have been working in the area since the early 80s. I also have been on the Planning Commission for the City of Santa Fe for a 6-year period when we were developing the general plan as well as looking at how zoning interfaces with building codes. I'm bringing an example today that I'll hand out at the end of my presentation that I was personally involved in just a few blocks from here. Now, I recognize a few blocks from here is a city building, but its zoning and its building codes has direct pertinence to the new zoning and building codes that you will be studying as you send this new use out into the community. Our building is the Guadalupe Center on Guadalupe Street across from the new Valladahm Museum construction. We are a condominium association, and an applicant came to us wanting to buy a unit in our building, which has a centralized atrium and individual units. And he said that he was putting in a retail cannabis use, and that it was not yet approved by the City of Santa Fe, but he was going to buy the building, the condominium unit in advance in preparation for this. What we learned, because he told us repeatedly in a Zoom meeting, was that he was choosing this location because it was 1 block from the New Mexico High School for the Arts. So I ask you to look at your zoning and to make sure that you define distances from youth facilities, schools, things of that sort that could be directly impacted. He was saying that he could move into our facility as a retail facility, when in fact what we learned was he was actually planning it as a greenhouse. And that therefore had not only impacts on zoning, because it was not zoned for a greenhouse for cannabis, but also impacts on building codes. We learned that his intention was to use the space as it was, and the following building codes would have been violated in the process. As a greenhouse, he was planning on building all this on a flat concrete floor with no drains, where in fact there's so much water that obviously drains and slope floors are required. He also had no independent HVAC system. He was hooked to our systems throughout the building, which means the smell of marijuana would have spread throughout our building. There were also no water connections that would have been required that would have isolated water use for that retail and greenhouse. And so the whole condominium would have had to have been addressing how to separate his water use from the rest of ours. There was no rated sheetrock for this, and all the walls and ceilings were sheetrock, which means they would rot pretty quickly. There were exposed steel trusses that had no protective painting on it, so the paint would all peel and would become a problem. And last but not least, he intended to allow his buyers coming into his, quote, greenhouse to use our exterior porch for testing his products, quote unquote. And so we wrote a letter that I'm going to leave with you today, listing all of our concerns and complaints about his violations. And I just thought it might help you in looking forward as to how you interface zoning and building codes. And be glad, do I hand these to you or to the, yes?
Thank you, Subi.
Thank you very much, and if there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody next? Again, this is a public hearing. Anybody out there want to come up and speak on behalf or against this ordinance? Anybody online?
Mr. Chair, let's see if our it looks like our IT department is pulling up any available or any speakers.
anyone from the public that would like to make a comment, please unmute yourself.
Okay, JJ has a question of Penny.
Penny. I see there isn't a lot of interest in this for the county. You know, it's very controversial within the city. They postponed it, you know, from their city council meeting. And the one question I was going to ask you is who was consulted in the formulation of the county ordinance on the cannabis?
We have worked together as a team with Building and Development Planning and our legal department to look at that. We've also had discussions with Washington State, the executive director of the Association of Counties there, Bernalillo County, Sandoval County. So we've all kind of been discussing options.
And did you get a lot of comments from the public? Because I saw this advertised in the legals about 2 weeks ago saying it was going to be covered in this planning commission meeting. Did you get a lot of comments from the public in general?
Mr. Chair, Planning Commission Member Gonzalez, we have 4 public comments so far. They were handed out to you. Most of them are related to the personal grow. Initially, we were recommending indoor, so most of those comments were related to that.
And the other question I have, how does this ordinance going to affect the planning areas within the county? I think there's about 10 or 12 planning areas, like La Cienega planning area. How is this ordinance going to affect the local planning areas? Do they have any say in this matter, or?
Mr. Chair, Commission Member Gonzalez, yes, you're right. There are, I think, 12 community planning areas. They have their own use table, so again, those uses would fall under their use table for like retail store or commercial greenhouse, how they have allowed them, which is the same as medical cannabis at the moment. But if a community does not like these regulations, they would have the ability to come back in and go through a process to make amendments, as long as that was noticed for the whole community. So there is that ability as well.
And will county staff be available for the local planning areas to help and formulate an ordinance that is, you know, in sync with the county ordinance? Can we rely on county staff to help us out?
Mr. Chair, Planning Commission Member Gonzalez, they won't need to come through a process if the uses and the uses that are specified in their use table are the way that they want that to be regulated. If communities do want to come through a process, then yes, we do have county staff available. Obviously, if all 12 want to come through at the same time, that's going to be difficult. But we are working with, I think, 3 communities at the moment to amend their plans and their overlays. And it is a process that staff actually assists with.
Well, thank you very much, Benny.
Thank you, JJ. I have a question for Penny. Penny, I'm kind of curious, or I guess I should say concerned about this use, some of this use, as far as like if a manufacturer who sells to a retail and so forth, and is any kind of a safeguards for pot being evolving into like hashish or anything stronger? I think what I hear out there, hashish comes from pot. There's something else out there called wax, which is made by propane. Has that ever been discussed at all?
Mr. Chair, no, it hasn't. The Act relates to cannabis, so it would be anything that falls under the Act.
Okay. Enforcement. Is enforcement going to be covered by the sheriff's or land use inspector?
Mr. Chair, that will depend what the enforcement is. Obviously, if it's operating a business without a business license, that's something that code enforcement deals with. The odor portion of the nuisance ordinance would probably again be enforced by code enforcement. You know, whether or not we've got this use, that's a difficult ordinance to enforce. You know, noise, we have noise meters. We don't have a meter that reads smell.
Yeah.
So that will be difficult to enforce, but that is through our code enforcement officers.
Another question I have is that, you know how around these days they have cigar bars. Is there going to be something where cannabis bars are going to be popping up as well?
Mr. Chair, yes, it's likely that there will be cannabis consumption areas. Again, if it involves the smoking, it needs to be indoor in a standalone, but if it was like in edibles or something like that, it can be outdoor.
Okay, now I would like to make a comment that I have received a lot of calls about personal uses being kind of restrictive. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, does the commission have any other questions? Steve?
I have a question here. I'd like to talk about this document a minute. So I'm wondering, where did this document come from?
Staff created it. So
And these properties that are listed as potential cannabis buffers, I assume that term is being used because they're not being designated as an establishment or a consumption area. It's just some generalized term here.
Mr. Chair, Planning Commission Member Krentz, no, these documents were created, the maps were created to give an idea as to whether or not with a 200 or 300 foot separation between non-residential uses, you could have one retailer or consumption area in a general area, or whether there would be opportunity for multiple. So staff put those together. The indication there, the blue properties that are outlined are just taken as non-residential properties. They are not retailers, they are not consumption areas. It's an example of what could happen. Obviously, if those property moves, that buffer area moves. All it's doing is showing you an area of non-residential use, a possible piece of property, and a 100, 200, and 300 foot buffer area. When we were at the commission, Commissioner asked, how far is 200 foot kind of on a street? How many houses is that? Obviously in the city, where you've just got storefronts, that may be more separation, you know, between stores, like you might get 5 or 6 stores. If you can see some of those maps, it might just be 2 or 3 stores that separate, because in the county in general, we have larger lot sizes. And the area is measured from the actual facility, which in general from the state says it's the building. So it's not the property boundary, it's the building. So they were produced just for a few sample areas to show that we wouldn't be prohibiting multiple uses within a commercial or non-residential area or traditional community area.
Okay, the reason I'm following up on this is I just want to make sure of a couple of things. So the owners of these properties, they have not applied to the county for any kind of cannabis use or production?
Absolutely not, no.
They have not spoken to the county about potentially being any kind of cannabis use or production area?
I have no idea if people have called and said we may be looking at a piece of property in the county. Again, these maps are put for reference purposes only. They are not stating that any of those uses.
Here's the thing, is that this is a public document. No, what's going to happen here is as soon as the public sees this document, they're going to be saying, oh, so-and-so over in Cerritos is going to be a cannabis production or consumption area. That's what's going to happen here. Now, I know your intent is probably not to do that, but I just want to get down in the record specifically that these properties that were selected as illustration were just randomly selected and not in any way indicate action by these properties moving forward.
They were randomly selected. They are not approved for any use. We are not changing a zoning on a piece of property. They were selected as being existing. Maybe they sell, I don't know, bicycles. And what the intent was for you to see what a 200 or 300 foot separation looks like at the Agora Center or at Bisbee Court or one of those 4 areas. So we can certainly amend that map before it goes forward again and make sure that we've got disclaimers on that map. But they were shown for informational only.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any other questions from the commission?
Sure, I
Rhea?
have a question. I have a question for staff. It was similar to Commissioner Gonzalez's question with regards to past research that has been done in order to create this ordinance. So I'm wondering, with regards to the cannabis consumption areas where these are restricted to just indoor use, could you provide me with some examples from other states that already have approved recreational cannabis? And it would be helpful with specific examples of specific municipalities that have limited cannabis consumption to only indoors.
I don't have them right here with me. Robert is looking up some of those now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. While we're waiting, Penny, I have a question here. So I'm just curious how much the fire department's involved in this, and it might be more through CID, but like, for example, of these, due to the possibility of flammable materials and stuff, are the fire people going to require like firewalls and maybe sprinkler systems in some of these buildings?
Mr. Chair, any of these businesses will need to be reviewed by fire and would need to meet those standards. So when we look at something like manufacturing, the way that we would regulate that would be in our industrial areas or planned development areas. Those require community water and therefore a pressurized water system. The other areas they allow are the larger residential areas. So hopefully in those areas you'd have a big separation between a neighboring use, but in those areas there will be extensive fire protection requirements because many of those areas don't have pressurized fire. We will be working with our fire department, so any application for non-residential that comes in right now is reviewed by our fire department, and this will be no exception.
Okay, thank you. Also on that note, do we have any, as far as, is there any issues about when they're cleaning stuff or washing stuff, is there going to be any issues about them putting anything down into the septic tanks or into the source system? You know, when they're washing out or something?
Mr. Chair, I don't know. I don't believe that the State Act has addressed that. They have addressed water use, but they have not specifically addressed anything to do with wastewater.
Yeah, I guess if they were washing out, they'd wash out some seeds outside and they'd probably grow again somewhere else too. Okay, any other questions?
Mr. Chair, I have another question.
Yeah, please do.
For a cannabis retailer, would that business be allowed to co-locate with an existing retailer, for example, a gift shop or a gallery?
Mr. Chair, Commission Member Serna, yes, I believe so. It would depend whether or not the state had any other regulations for their issuance of licenses. I do believe that they couldn't be located where you sell alcohol. I believe I read that. They cannot be. Yes, that's what I said. So if you're selling cards, then yes, if you get the license from the state, we wouldn't have anything that prohibited that, but the state does prohibit you selling cannabis if you also sell alcohol.
Thank you.
Penny, I have another one here. In this post-pandemic era here, is there any discussion been about delivery, of them actually delivering their product?
Mr. Chair, we would call that as a courier. Do you have any examples? Do you want to come up? Is it not on the L drive? Do you know where they were from? you know where they were from? Denver? You think Denver's inside? Sorry, we're looking on our pages, but it looks like where we put them has just been wiped. So we did look at ordinances in Colorado. I believe we also looked at some ordinances in California. And Lucy did a fair amount of the research, so she's trying to find which areas.
Mr. Chair, while staff is doing research, I think the public hearing, we're still in the public hearing portion of the meeting. It looks like there are a few people who are calling in. If anyone would like to speak, in order to unmute yourself, you will need to hit *6 if you're calling in. And if you're on via the computer, then you'll just need to unmute yourself on the computer.
Stepping up, I'll step up and sit, Isabel. Sid Isbell, Madrid, New Mexico. We're planning on obtaining a vertically integrated license, and I have a curiosity around the limitation of having a retail location.
Could you speak closer to your mic? Or?
Sure. I have a question on, we're obtaining a vertically integrated license, and I have a question about being able to co-locate a retail location and a consumption area. So if there's a buffer zone, you won't be able to do that. So I have a question about that. The other comment I would have is about limiting outdoor grow. One of the huge benefits of being in New Mexico is you can grow outdoors for a good portion of the year. And if you're in a rural location, limiting an outdoor grow would be pretty devastating in terms of energy usage and that sort of thing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, staff had looked at a co-location between retail and consumption on the same premises, and if the state issues your licenses for that, you could do that. This is between separate buildings, so kind of like that would be like a vertically integrated business of retail and consumption, and then the next retail or consumption or retail and consumption would need to have the separation, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question here. Was there any discussion about, for outdoor growing, the height of the plants?
Mr.
Is there
Chair,
like a
height
height
of
limitation
the plant?
when they're growing their plants outside? I'm just curious if that was ever discussed at all.
No, we didn't discuss plant height limitation.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm just hearing behind me, if you did point towards the option of you can grow outdoors as long as it's not visible, then, you know, I mean, we pretty much know it'll get to like 8 foot, around about 8 foot. So, you know, you'd be looking at the highest point of the plant growth.
Thank you.
Oops, careful. Yeah, but I don't know what.
They're allowed in hospitality, those businesses.
It doesn't say. Mr. Chair, Planning Commission members, we're actually having a hard time finding our data. We put it on a shared transfer drive, and I guess we just got hit with a transfer drive wipe from the IT department. So we will research that again, but we did look at California and Colorado requirements.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cerna, we did get a response directly from the Colorado regulation folks, and we asked them that question in regard to, oh, shit, I just lost it. Does Colorado have regulations regarding consumption areas? And they indicated that they are allowed, the consumption areas are allowed for hospitality.
Hey, Robert, could you talk to the mic a little bit?
Let me.
Now I lost that.
Oh, sorry.
So in answer to your question in regard to the regulations in Colorado, they do allow hospitality businesses for consumption areas, and there are consumption areas outdoors in Colorado. Denver didn't allow it that way. Some places, yeah. I think they did.
Okay. Any other questions, staff on the commission?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Warren?
Uh,
Steve, go ahead.
I'm wondering how exactly we're going to act on this. Are we going to ask for a motion on the originally written ordinance and then discuss these two sections, 1022-8, as an amendment to that motion, or are we going to start by discussing these 1022-8 sections and then move to the full ordinance?
Let's see. I was thinking that we just make a motion to include either alternative 1 or 2, or come up with our own.
Okay, so one motion then would cover both.
Does that make sense to you guys?
Mr. Chair, if I could ask if we can have the motion on the ordinance and then the personal use options, the hours meeting the new regulations for the Sunday sales, and then also the separation issues. So those 4 different items. It can all be done together, or if it's easier, you could do the individual changes first, the personal hours and separation, and then the rest of the ordinance, however you feel comfortable doing that.
Okay, thank you. What's the pleasure of the commission? How do you guys want to do it?
Mr. Chair, I believe that we have to close the public hearing before we can move on to a motion, and I would just recommend that maybe you do one more call to see if there's anyone online or through WebEx that wants to speak.
I agree. Thank you, Vicki. Anybody out there that wants to speak on this project or on this ordinance? We need some more input. Please step forward, sir.
My name is Roger Griffith. Yes. Roger Griffith. Hello.
Howdy.
I'm interested in being a marijuana producer. I've been looking at this and researching it for quite some time. And I really appreciate the commission reviewing this in advance of the licensing being open on September 1st and getting all your ducks in a row, so to speak. I had an observation that occurred to me while I was listening to the earlier testimony, particularly that of the condominium owner. And I think I'm not sure if it would be really possible what she describes, but it's really something that would be appalling if it would come into your condominium association. And so I think everyone realizes that it's something we want to protect about. But I did notice something as I was reading through the draft ordinance. There seems to be possible the distinction between a producer, somebody that is essentially like a nursery person. They're growing a plant, they're watering it, there's dirt, there's soil. And a manufacturer that's using solvents and other things that could be dangerous is a distinction I think you need to bring up. So there seemed to be some confusion in the language. It says a manufacturer is anyone that sends out something for testing, and producers have to do that as well. So I thought that it would be valuable to put in some language that distinguishes those people that use
solvents and chemicals in the manufacturing process so that they're a distinct category.
Okay. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Frank, please go ahead.
I think, Vicki, I'm a little puzzled about, you said there's the separation of retailers, there's the personal growers, and then there's the hours. What was the issue on the hours?
Sorry, is that on? Yes. As I read that section, we realized that when we drafted it, we used the hours that changed on July 1st from the state. So there's now Sunday morning hours are allowed for sale and consumption. So it would just to say that you would support us changing the hours just to be the same as the state now has for alcohol.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Penny. Any other questions? Comments? Frank?
I have a motion.
Okay. Wait, hold on. Let me check the public. Let me close. Let me check anybody out there that wants to speak from the public? Please come forward now. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. All right. Okay, what's the pleasure of the commission discussion, or we got a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners the adoption of the draft ordinance that has been submitted to us with the following two changes. One is that the hours would be changed to reflect the current law on the hours of the sale of alcoholic beverages. And the second would be to delete the restriction on the personal growing of marijuana for personal use. That it can be to indoors, that it could be indoors or outdoors.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
We have no discussion?
Wait, okay, let's have the discussion. Steve?
I've thought about this, and especially when you brought up this section about, well, how high a fence? And I'm thinking, well, gosh, how high does a marijuana plant grow? But then again, if the point of the ordinance would be to limit the visibility, it could be interesting to try to figure out if it's down from a road or something like that. I have to say I'm in favor of having some sort of visual break. I think that the arguments presented by the county make sense, or the pros make sense for that, rather than having no regulation at all. That's my opinion.
Any discussion from the other commissioners?
I have a comment.
Frank?
Yeah, my problem is that this would work fine for somebody who lives on 6 acres if there were these kind of limits, but for someone who is on a smaller parcel, you may not be able to have it shielded. And I think that this is something that, if it turns out to be a problem, we could then promulgate further restrictions. But I'm not sure that I see that this is going to be a big problem.
Mr. Chairman?
Steve?
What you just said brings up kind of another interesting point. How specifically does the county figure out the difference between an individual grower and a commercial cannabis activity? A commercial grower.
Prince, personal growth and adult is allowed 6 plants. Per entire household, there's a maximum of 12 plants, whereas the micro growers, I think, are up to 200 plants, and the larger growers have more than that. So
Your definition is based on the state law.
that is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Rhea.
just one more question. It's more of a clarification that I misunderstood, I think. Under what circumstances then were growers of any size and any type of category, what type of growers can grow outside and where can they grow outside?
The proposal for commercial producers, so those that need a license from the state, would be that they either grow indoors or they grow outdoors in the zoning districts allowed at the same time as dairy farms, which is our ag ranch, rural and rural fringe. So they're the larger lot sizes. Personal, if you delete this action as is on the motion, then that means that personal grow can be indoors or outdoors, but per property you're limited to 12 plants.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhea. I'd just like to note that I've seen some areas where they've had some tall plants, and then when they get too tall, they bend them over or hold them down, and then they make them into a long plant, and then the stem shoots its own shoots out. So it's going to be interesting. Okay, where were we here? Okay, we have a motion on the table, right?
Yes.
Motion and a second, I believe.
Okay, I guess the question I have I guess it's kind of late. The motion that we had, Frank, was that also including the alternatives 1 or 2? Or was that the original?
No, my motion on the personal grower is that that section be deleted so that there not be a restriction. It could be indoors or outdoors. And I didn't propose adopting anything to change the 200-foot limit.
Okay, I think I got confused there. Okay, there is okay. Let's vote. All in favor of the motion that was made?
Mr.
Say
Chair? Mr. Chair?
Aye.
Wait, the BCC generally does ordinances by roll call vote, and so legal has said that we can do this by roll call.
Okay, I thought we didn't have to do that anymore because we weren't on Zoom. Okay, but let's do it.
Generally, no, you don't.
Let's do a roll call, please.
Okay. Charlie Gonzalez.
Yes.
Frank Katz.
Yes.
J.J. Gonzalez.
Yes.
Steve Krentz.
Yes.
Libra Lopez. Susan Martin. Yes. Rhea Serna.
Nay.
It was aye?
No.
No. Okay. So it's 6-1.
Okay. So what do we do next here?
Petitions from the floor, it looks like.
Okay, so we're done with this?
That's it, right?
Okay.
I believe we're done with this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for attending. Packet. Okay. Any petitions from the floor? Okay. Communications from the commission members?
Yes.
Frank.
I would like to thank staff for all of their hard work during the pandemic and keeping us going, and it's good to see you again in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Sure.
Okay, is that communications? No, yeah. Okay, on communications to commission members, I would just like to say it's really an honor for me to be here as a chairman after the refurbishing of the building and so forth. And I would just like to mention when I was a little kid, my dad was a deputy county clerk, and he used to bring me in here with a little boy. As a little boy, I was like maybe 5 years old, and we used to come into the building here, and at the bottom, and here in the bottom floor, there used to be a little candy store, and I used to bring me with him, and I really didn't want to go, but that's where I learned my first how to compromise. The reason I didn't like to come with him is because I'd come here as a little kid, and all the women and stuff would be kissing me and stuff, and And the trade-off being that I knew there was a candy store. There used to be a candy store over here where the vending machines were. There used to be an actual candy machine there. And so the trade-off was that I'd come over here with my dad and I'd withstand the kisses from the girls and stuff in order to get candy. So that's one of my first lessons on compromise. And it's really an honor for me to be here, sitting here as a chairman in the new refurbished building. I thank you all. Communications from the attorney.
No, other than to reiterate others' sense that it's good to be back and to see everybody in person. It's very good.
I agree. Matters from land use staff.
Mr. Chair, we don't have any matters to address. Thank you.
Even Kavanaugh? Okay. Our next planning commission meeting is August 19th, 2021. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you for coming.